For 7 years, I've watched my in-laws, Robert and Elaine Thompson, make subtle jabs about my intentions with their son. The whispers, the sideways glances, the comments about marrying up, I'd endured it all with a smile. But when they openly called me a gold digger at their 40th anniversary celebration, something inside me snapped. No one expected what I did next, least of all them. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't confrontation. It's proving everyone wrong in the most unexpected way. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The first time. I met Cameron Thompson. I wasn't impressed by his designer suit or the sleek BMW he drove. What caught my attention was how he helped an elderly woman with her groceries while everyone else rushed past. It was a rainy Tuesday at Jensen's Market in downtown Portland, and I was running late for my shift at the local coffee shop where I worked to pay my way through nursing school. "You dropped this," a voice called out as I hurried toward the exit. I turned to see a tall man with kind eyes holding up my worn student ID. His smile was genuine, not the practiced charm I'd grown wary of from guys who thought they could impress. "Me. Thanks," I said, tucking the ID into my pocket. I'd be lost without it. "Emily Wilson, Nursing, Portland Community College," he read before handing it over. "Future healthcare hero, I see?" I laughed, a bit embarrassed. "Trying to be. Right now I'm just a late barista." "Well, Emily Wilson, future healthcare hero, would you let me buy you a coffee sometime when you're not making them for other people?" That was how it started. Cameron and I, two people from completely different worlds finding connection in a crowded supermarket. What I didn't know then was that he was Cameron Thompson, son of Robert Thompson, the real estate mogul whose company owned half the commercial properties in the city. On our third date, Cameron took me to dinner at an upscale restaurant where the menu didn't even list prices. As we were seated, I noticed several people nodding respectfully in his direction. "You come here often?" I asked, suddenly conscious of my thrift store dress. "Family business dinners mostly," he replied casually, then changed the subject. It wasn't until the waiter approached with, "Good evening, Mr. Thompson," that I realized something was different about him. The waiter's deferential tone, the prime table we'd been given without a reservation, the signs were there. "Thompson, as in Thompson Properties?" I asked after the waiter left. Cameron looked uncomfortable, pushing his hand through his dark hair, a gesture I'd later learn meant he was nervous. "Yeah, my dad started it. I work there now." "So you're what, rich?" The bluntness of my question made him choke on his water. After recovering, he looked me straight in the eyes. "My family has money, yes. I was hoping that wouldn't change anything between us. And truthfully, it didn't, at least not for me. I was raised by a single mom who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. We never had much, but she taught me that a person's character matters more than their bank account. I was attracted to Cameron's kindness, his quiet intelligence, and how he listened when I spoke, not what his last name might mean. 6 months into our relationship, Cameron finally suggested meeting his parents. I'd been wondering when this would happen, as he'd already met my mom several times. She had immediately taken to him, impressed not by his wealth, which he never flaunted around her, but by how he fixed her leaky faucet and remembered how she liked her tea. "They can be a bit intense," Cameron warned as we drove to his parents' estate in the West Hills, "especially my mother." Intense was an understatement. The Thompson estate was essentially a mansion, with manicured grounds and a view overlooking the entire city. A housekeeper opened the door, and I felt immediately out of place in my carefully selected outfit that had seemed so perfect in my apartment, but now felt woefully inadequate. Elaine Thompson, perfectly coiffed with not a silver hair out of place, air-kissed my cheeks while assessing everything from my shoes to my earrings. Robert Thompson gave me a firm handshake and an equally firm stare, as if he were evaluating a property for purchase rather than meeting his son's girlfriend. "So, Emily," Elaine began once we were seated in their formal living room with its pristine white furniture. "Cameron tells us you're in nursing school?" "Yes, I'll graduate next year. I'm specializing in pediatric care." "How noble," she replied, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "And your family? What does your father do?" The first of many subtle digs. I explained that my father wasn't in the picture, and my mother worked as an administrative assistant at a dental office. "Emily works at Cloudbreak Coffee downtown while going to school full-time," Cameron interjected, proudly. "She's on the dean's list even with her crazy schedule." "Admirable," Robert said flatly, swirling his scotch. "Though perhaps not the most ambitious career path." The evening continued with variations of the same theme. Polite questions designed to highlight the vast gulf between my background and theirs. By dessert, the message was clear. I wasn't what they had envisioned for their son. As we drove home, Cameron apologized profusely. "They're from a different generation. They'll come around once they get to know you." But they didn't. Over the next few months, they made minimal effort to know the real me. Instead, whenever we met, they would casually mention the daughters of their friends, girls from good families with the right connections, education, and pedigree. What the Thompsons didn't understand was that their disapproval only strengthened our bond. Cameron and I were determined to build our relationship on our terms. When he proposed a year later, it wasn't with a flashy diamond in an expensive restaurant. It was on the rooftop of my apartment building, with twinkling string lights he'd hung himself and the ring that had belonged to my grandmother, the one piece of jewelry my mom had saved from happier times. "I want to build a life with you, Emily," he said, kneeling despite the puddles from the rain earlier that day. "A life that's ours, not my parents', not anyone else's. Just ours." I said yes without hesitation, and when we called his parents to share the news, their congratulations were as chilled as the champagne they probably poured themselves while plotting how to change their son's mind. Little did they know that their disapproval was about to evolve from subtle jabs to open hostility, and that I was far stronger than they gave me credit for. Our wedding was a study in compromise. I wanted something small and intimate. Cameron was fine with that, but Elaine Thompson nearly had a conniption at the thought of her only son having anything less than a society wedding featured in Portland Monthly. "People will talk, Cameron," she insisted during one of our planning dinners at their estate. The Hendersons' daughter had 500 guests at the Riverfront Plaza. "Good for the Hendersons," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "But we're thinking more like 75 people at Laurel Gardens." Robert cleared his throat. "We have relationships to maintain business connections. This isn't just about what you want." I felt Cameron tense beside me. "Actually, Dad, it is exactly what we want. It's our wedding." The conversation devolved from there, with Elaine suggesting she could help by taking over the planning entirely. When she mentioned her friend who owned a bridal boutique where I could find a dress more suitable than whatever department store option I might be considering, I excused myself to the restroom before I said something I'd regret. In the end, we compromised on 150 guests at the Portland Botanic Garden. The Thompsons invited their business associates and social circle, while we were allowed to include our actual friends. I found my dress at a vintage boutique, an elegant 1950s design that cost a fraction of what Elaine had budgeted, but made me feel beautiful. The wedding day itself was surprisingly perfect. My mom cried happy tears, and even Robert seemed moved. During our vows. For a magical few hours, the gap between our worlds didn't seem so vast. That changed at the reception. I was searching for Cameron when I overheard Elaine speaking to a group of her friends near the champagne fountain. "Of course, it's not what we envisioned," she said, unaware I was just around the corner. "But Cameron is going through this phase. You know how boys can be, thinking with their hearts instead of their heads. A woman's voice responded, "Well, she seems sweet, if a bit simple. Perhaps you can mold her." "That's assuming she's here? For the long haul." Another added with a laugh. "Though marrying a Thompson certainly solves her financial worries." Elaine's response chilled me. "Let's just say I've suggested Cameron consider a prenuptial agreement. One must protect family assets from opportunistic situations." I slipped away before they could see me, my cheeks burning with humiliation. I found Cameron talking to some college friends and pulled him onto the dance floor, forcing a smile while fighting back tears. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, always attuned to my emotions. "Nothing," I lied. "Just overwhelmed." I never told him what I'd overheard. What would be the point? It would only hurt him and create more tension. Instead, I resolved to prove myself through actions rather than words. After the wedding, we moved into a modest home in a nice neighborhood, purchased with Cameron's money, yes, but far less grand than what his parents expected. I finished nursing school and started working at Portland Children's Hospital in Sietsituo, the oncology ward. The work was emotionally draining but deeply fulfilling. Cameron continued at Thompson Properties, but increasingly expressed frustration with his father's old-fashioned business approach. "He treats tenants like they're beneath him," he confided one night, "and he refuses to consider more sustainable building practices because they cut into the profit margin." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Our first major fight as a married couple came 6 months in, when his parents surprised us with a Caribbean cruise for Christmas, scheduled exactly when I had committed to work, so other nurses with children could have the holiday off. "You can't switch shifts?" Cameron asked, clearly disappointed. "It's the Caribbean, Em." "People are counting on me," I explained. "Kids who are spending Christmas in a hospital bed." "My parents spent a fortune on this. Your parents knew my work schedule. They did this deliberately." Deep down, he knew I was right. The Thompsons had mastered the art of creating no-win situations that painted me as the problem. When I couldn't attend their country club fundraisers because of night shifts, I was unsupportive of family obligations. When I suggested hosting a dinner at our home instead of always going to theirs, I was trying to distance Cameron from his family. The subtle warfare continued for 3 years. I focused on building my career, volunteering at a free clinic on weekends, and supporting Cameron as he gradually took on more responsibility at Thompson Properties. We were happy despite his parents' machinations, which seemed to frustrate them even more. Then came the opportunity that would change everything. A former patient's grandmother, a sweet woman named Dorothy, who had brought homemade cookies to the nursing staff every time her grandson had a treatment, passed away and unexpectedly left me a modest inheritance of $30,000. She was always telling me I reminded her of her daughter who passed years ago, I explained to Cameron, stunned by the request. But I never expected this. "That's amazing, Em. What do you want to do with it?" Most people would suggest a vacation, home renovations, or simply saving it. But I had a different idea, one that had been percolating since nursing school. "I want to invest it," I said. Decisively, Cameron raised his eyebrows. "Invest? In what?" "Something of my own. Something with purpose." I took a deep breath. "I want to start a mobile healthcare service for underserved communities. Begin small. Build slowly." He looked at me with surprise that quickly transformed into admiration. "You've been thinking about this for a while, haven't you?" I nodded. "Every time I see patients who got sicker because they couldn't access preventive care or seniors who can't make it to appointments. There's such a need, Cam." That night, we stayed up late sketching plans and running numbers. Cameron's business background complemented my healthcare knowledge perfectly. By sunrise, Wilson Mobile Health had gone from a vague dream to the beginnings of a solid business plan. What I didn't realize was that this decision would not only set me on a new professional path, but would eventually provide the perfect response to years of Thompson family disdain. Starting a business from scratch while working full-time as a pediatric oncology nurse wasn't easy. The $30,000 from Dorothy seemed substantial at first, but once I started pricing medical equipment, liability insurance, and the specialized van we'd need, reality set in quickly. "This is going to take more than Dorothy's inheritance," I admitted to Cameron one evening, spreadsheets scattered across our dining table. "Much more." "Let me help," he offered immediately. "I can invest some of my savings." I shook my head firmly. "No, I need to do this on my own." "We're married. My money is your money." "That's not how your parents see it," I replied before I could stop myself. Cameron's expression fell. "Is that what this is about? Proving something to my parents?" "No," I said, softening my tone. "It's about proving something to myself. Your whole life. Things have come easily because of your family name and money. I've had to work for everything. This has to be mine, Cam. I need to know I can build something valuable on my own merits." After a long pause, he nodded. "I understand, but will you at least let me help with the business plan? No money, just expertise." I agreed to that compromise. For the next few months, we spent evenings strategizing. Cameron taught me about profit margins, operating costs, and sustainable growth models. I applied for small business grants, networked with former medical school professors, and pitched my concept to potential partners. 6 months of rejections followed. Banks deemed the venture too risky. Medical equipment suppliers wouldn't offer favorable terms to an unproven startup. Just when I was about to shelve the dream temporarily, an unexpected opportunity emerged. Dr. Harriet Chen, my former clinical supervisor, reached out. She was leading a community health initiative funded by a national foundation and needed someone to launch a pilot program for mobile pediatric care. "Your proposal crossed my desk, Emily," she explained over coffee. "It's exactly what we've been looking for. The foundation could provide matching funds if you can secure the rest of the startup capital." With Dr. Chen's support, doors began to open. A medical equipment supplier agreed to lease-to-own terms. A local credit union specialized in women-owned businesses approved a loan for the remaining capital when paired with Dorothy's inheritance. Within weeks, Wilson Mobile Health had transformed from a paper concept to a funded startup. Our first mobile unit, a retrofitted van with basic pediatric care capabilities, launched in the Riverside District, an underserved neighborhood, on Portland's east side. We offered vaccinations, wellness checks, and basic treatment for common childhood ailments. Parents who couldn't miss work for doctor's appointments brought their children during our evening hours. Grandparents who struggled with transportation walked a block to our designated parking spots rather than taking 3 buses to the nearest clinic. The work was exhausting, but exhilarating. I reduced my hospital hours to part-time and poured everything into growing the mobile practice. Cameron supported me completely, picking up dinner when I came home too tired to cook, listening to my daily challenges, celebrating small victories. His parents, predictably, had a different perspective. A glorified nurse's office on wheels. Robert dismissed when Cameron proudly mentioned our services at a family dinner. "Hardly seems like a viable business model." "It's charity work, essentially," Elaine added with a thin smile in my direction. "Though I suppose it's sweet that you're trying to help those people." "Those people are families who need health care," I replied evenly. "And it's not charity. We charge sliding scale fees based on income. We've been cash positive since month 3. Robert's eyebrows raised slightly, the first hint of respect I'd ever seen from him. "Is that so?" "Emily's brilliant at this," Cameron interjected. "She's already planning a second unit for senior care." "Well," Robert said, reaching for his wine glass, "let's hope this little project doesn't distract too much from your actual career." Or from starting a family. You're not getting any younger, you know. The moment of potential connection vanished. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that proving him wrong would be more satisfying than any retort. And prove him wrong, I did. Bure. The end of our first year, Wilson Mobile Health had expanded to 2 units and a staff of 6 part-time nurses. We'd secured contracts with 3 school districts to provide on-site healthcare for students. Local businesses sponsored us to visit their employees quarterly, finding that preventive care reduced sick days and healthcare costs. The real breakthrough came when a Portland-based tech company featured our operation in their corporate social responsibility report. Their CEO had brought his daughter to our mobile unit when she developed an ear infection during a weekend outing, and he'd been impressed by the efficiency and quality of care. That publicity led to a meeting with Venture, capitalists interested in scaling our model to other cities. They saw profitable potential in our approach to healthcare delivery, exactly what I'd envisioned when sketching those first plans. They're offering $2 million in seed funding, I told Cameron, still dazed after the meeting. $2 million? Cam, for my little project. He swept me into a hug, spinning me around our kitchen. Of course they are. You've created something amazing. We'd need to restructure, form a proper corporation. They want me as CEO. Emily Thompson, healthcare disruptor and chief executive, he said proudly. I hesitated. Actually, I'd keep it as Wilson. Wilson Healthcare Solutions. A flicker of hurt crossed his face. Because of my parents? Because I built this as Emily Wilson, I explained gently. Because that's who I was before I met you, and I need to honor her journey. This isn't about your family name. It's about preserving mine. He nodded slowly, understanding. Wilson Healthcare Solutions it is then. But you know what this means, right? What? A mischievous smile spread across his face. You'll officially be worth more than me once this funding comes through? Dad's going to lose his mind. I laughed, but felt a pang of apprehension. The Thompsons had always seen me as beneath them, someone who had married their son for financial security. How would they react when the balance of success in our marriage shifted? I was about to find out, and it would test our family bonds, in ways I never anticipated. Venture capital funding changed everything. Suddenly, Wilson Healthcare Solutions wasn't just a passion project running out of a converted van. It was a corporation with investors, expectations, and significant growth potential. We moved into real office space, hired a management team, and began expanding to neighboring counties. I traded my scrubs for business attire most days, though I still made a point of working clinically at least once a week. Never forget why. We started this, became my mantra to our growing staff. 6 months into our expansion, Cameron came home with news of his own. Dad wants to retire, he announced, loosening his tie as he sank onto our couch. He's offering me the position of CEO at Thompson Properties. I sat beside him, processing this information. That's huge, Cam. How do you feel about it? He ran, his hands through his hair. That familiar, nervous gesture. Conflicted. Taking over the family business has always been the plan, but the company needs a complete overhaul. Dad's methods are outdated. The properties need sustainability upgrades, the tenant relationships are terrible, and the corporate culture is stuck in the 1980s. I saw the opportunity immediately. So change it. Make it yours. Dad would fight me every step of the way. Only, if he stays involved, make a clean break part of your conditions. Cameron looked at me with growing excitement. You think I could actually transform the company? I know you could. You've been talking about ethical real estate development since we met. This is your chance to build something meaningful with the resources you already have. That night, we stayed up late strategizing, just as we had for my business years earlier. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Supporting each other's dreams had always been the foundation of our relationship. Cameron accepted the CEO position with clear terms, complete operational control, and Robert's full retirement from day to day. Business. To everyone's surprise, Robert agreed. Later, Elaine confided to one of her friends, who promptly told my mother, who told me, that Robert was just relieved Cameron was finally showing some ambition instead of playing second fiddle to his wife's charity project. The comment stung, but I was too busy to dwell on it. Wilson Healthcare Solutions was expanding rapidly, now operating in 3 states with plans for 5 more. We'd developed proprietary software for mobile healthcare delivery that was generating its own revenue stream through licensing. Magazine profiles started referring to me as a healthcare entrepreneur rather than a nurse, which felt strange but validating. As our professional lives flourished, Cameron and I began discussing starting a family. We'd been married for nearly 5 years, both now established in our careers and financially secure. It seemed like the perfect time until everything fell apart. It started with headaches, dismissible at first, just stress from working too many hours. Then came the dizziness, the vision changes, the morning when I couldn't remember Cameron's cell phone number despite having dialed it daily for years. The diagnosis came on a rainy Thursday, delivered by a neurologist who had once been my colleague. A brain tumor, likely benign, but located in a challenging position. I would need surgery, followed by radiation. The recovery would be lengthy, with no guarantees about long-term effects. "I can't believe this," I whispered to Cameron in the car afterward. "The business? Our plans for a family?" "None of that matters right now," he said firmly, gripping my hand. "All that matters is getting you well." We agreed not to tell his parents immediately. I needed time to process everything before dealing with Elaine's particular brand of concern, which inevitably centered on how my problems affected her. The surgery was scheduled for the following month. In the meantime, I worked frantically to organize the business for my absence, appointing my COO as interim CEO and preparing detailed contingency plans. Cameron arranged to delegate his responsibilities at Thompson Properties, determined to be by my side throughout recovery. 2 weeks before the surgery, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. A major tenant filed a lawsuit against Thompson Properties, alleging years of negligence in building maintenance that had resulted in employee health issues. The case had merit. Robert had indeed cut corners on air quality systems in several buildings. "The timing couldn't be worse," Cameron said, pacing our living room after meeting with the company lawyers. "If this goes public, we could face similar suits from other tenants. The financial exposure is enormous." "Can you settle?" "The attorneys advise against it. Says it would look like an admission of guilt." Dad's furious, blaming me for not handling it better, as if I created the problem. He stopped pacing, looking stricken. I can't leave the company right now. If I step away during this crisis..." I understood the impossible position he was in. "Then don't. The company needs you." "But your surgery..." "My mom will be with me. The medical team is excellent. Handle what you need to at work and be there when you can." He knelt before me, taking my hands. "I promise to be there for you in sickness and in health." "I can't believe I'm even considering..." "This isn't about choosing work over me," I interrupted. "This is about preventing a disaster that could affect hundreds of employees and tenants. That matters too." In the end, we compromised. Cameron would work remotely from the hospital as much as possible, handling the crisis while staying informed about my condition. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best solution for an impossible situation. The day before my surgery, Elaine and Robert finally learned about my condition, not from us, but from a business associate who had connections at the hospital. They arrived at our home unannounced, Elaine in a state of barely controlled panic. "Why weren't we told?" she demanded, while Robert stood awkwardly in our entryway. "We had to hear from Patricia Holloway that our daughter-in-law is having brain surgery?" "We've been dealing with a lot," Cameron replied tensely. "The lawsuit, Emily's health..." That lawsuit is nothing compared to family, she interrupted, then turned to me. Emily, what does this mean for future grandchildren? Even facing brain surgery, my reproductive potential remained her primary concern. I had to laugh. It was either that or scream. We don't know yet, Elaine, I said, more calmly than I felt. Right now I'm focused on surviving the operation. She had the grace to look embarrassed. Of course, dear. We'll be at the hospital tomorrow, naturally. As they left, Robert lingered behind. Emily, he said awkwardly. We're hoping for the best outcome. It was the closest thing to genuine concern I'd ever received from him. Perhaps it took a brain tumor to humanize me in their eyes. No longer just the gold digger who had ensnared their son, but a person facing mortality. That night, as Cameron and I lay awake in bed, too anxious for sleep, I whispered, "Whatever happens tomorrow, know that you have made me happier than I ever thought possible." He pulled me closer. We have decades of happiness ahead of us. Tomorrow is just a bump in the road. I wished I shared his certainty as I drifted into uneasy sleep, wondering if our carefully built life was about to crumble around us. I remember fragments of the day of my surgery, the cold operating room, a nurse holding my hand, Cameron's tearful smile as they wheeled me away. Then nothing but disjointed images and sensations until I woke up 3 days later in the ICU, groggy and disoriented but alive. The surgery had been successful in removing the tumor, my surgeon explained when I was lucid enough to understand. The pathology confirmed it was benign. However, there had been complications, bleeding that required a second emergency procedure. My recovery would be longer and more challenging than initially anticipated. Those first weeks were a blur of pain, medication, and small victories. Sitting up unassisted, remembering the names of my nurses, finally being moved to a regular hospital room. Cameron practically lived at the hospital, working from a makeshift desk in the corner of my room, taking calls in the hallway, and sleeping in the recliner beside my bed. His parents visited daily, bringing flowers and food that quickly overwhelmed the limited space. Elaine hovered anxiously, constantly straightening my bedding or adjusting the window blinds. Robert mostly stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, asking too loud questions about my prognosis, as if volume could compensate for his discomfort. It was during their visits that I first noticed the tension between them, the clipped responses, the lack of eye contact, the way they never arrived or departed together. I attributed it to stress over my condition and Cameron's ongoing legal battle with the property lawsuit. My mother was my constant champion, fierce and protective. She took family medical leave from her job to help with my care, setting up a rotating schedule with Cameron so I was never alone. She also ran interference with the Thompsons when their visits became overwhelming, somehow managing to be both firm and diplomatic. That woman would reorganize heaven if they let her in, Mom muttered one afternoon, after Elaine had spent 30 minutes rearranging my get well cards according to size. She means well, I said weakly, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Elaine's helpfulness was performative, directed at the nurses and doctors more than at me. After 3 weeks in the hospital, I was finally discharged to continue recovery at home. Our spare bedroom was converted into a rehabilitation space, with equipment for physical therapy. I needed to relearn certain fine motor skills and rebuild my strength after the prolonged bed rest. The cognitive effects were the most frustrating: word-finding difficulties, memory lapses, occasional disorientation. The neurologist assured us these would likely improve with time and therapy, but the uncertainty was terrifying. Would I ever be able to return to my role as CEO? Had I lost parts of myself that would never return? Cameron was my rock through it all, patient when I grew frustrated, encouraging when I made progress, and unwavering in his belief that I would fully recover. His own professional crisis continued in the background. The lawsuit had expanded to include additional plaintiffs, and he was working frantically to implement air quality remediation in all Thompson properties while negotiating with the legal team. One afternoon, about 2 months into my recovery, I was resting on the couch when I overheard Cameron on a phone call in his home office. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the tension in his voice caught my attention. "No, Dad, I won't do that," he was saying. "The remediation has to happen regardless of the legal outcome. Because it's the right thing to do. These are people's health we're talking about." A pause. Then Cameron's voice turned colder than I'd ever heard it. "Your cost-cutting measures created this problem. I'm trying to fix it before anyone else gets sick. If that means dipping into the emergency reserves, so be it." Another pause. "No, absolutely not. Emily's treatment costs are not up for discussion. Her insurance covers most of it, and I'd spend every cent I have if necessary." His voice dropped. "I can't believe you'd even suggest that." I shifted on the couch, accidentally knocking a book to the floor. Cameron appeared in the doorway seconds later, his expression morphing from anger to concern. "Hey, you're supposed to be resting," he said gently, crossing to sit beside me. "Was that your dad?" He sighed. "Unfortunately, he's not handling things well." "He doesn't think you should be spending money on my treatment?" I asked, heart sinking. "It's not that exactly." Cameron rubbed his forehead. "The lawsuit has him panicking about finances. He suggested I ask you to use some of your company shares to help with Thompson Properties' legal expenses." I blinked in disbelief. "He wants me to sell part of my company to fix his mistakes?" "Basically." I told him it wasn't even worth discussing. "Why would he think I'd ever consider that?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. Cameron looked uncomfortable. "He still doesn't understand what you've built, Em. He thinks of Wilson Healthcare as my investment, essentially, that I bankrolled your little project, and therefore have a right to access those funds in a family emergency." The assumption was so fundamentally wrong, so dismissive of everything I'd accomplished, that I could only laugh. A hollow, bitter sound. 5 years of marriage, and they still see me as nothing but a gold digger who got lucky. "I'm sorry," Cameron said, taking my hand. "They don't know you like I do." "No," I agreed. "They've never tried to." The conversation left me deeply unsettled, not because of Robert's inappropriate request, but because it revealed how little had changed in their perception of me despite everything. In their eyes, I remained an opportunist who had married Cameron for financial security. Never mind that I now ran a multi-million-dollar company built with minimal help from my husband. 2 days later, my neurologist delivered unexpected good news during my follow-up appointment. My recovery was progressing faster than anticipated, with cognitive testing showing significant improvement. With continued therapy, he believed I could resume limited work responsibilities within a month. "Your brain is remarkably resilient," he explained, "and motivation plays a huge role in recovery. You clearly have that in spades." Cameron celebrated by bringing home champagne, non-alcoholic for me given my medication, and takeout from my favorite restaurant. As we toasted to my progress, I made a decision. "I want to go back to the office next week," I said. "Just for a few hours, to check in." "Are you sure that's wise?" Cameron asked, concerned. "The doctor said a month." "For regular duties, yes, but I need to see what's happening with my company. I've been out of commission for nearly 3 months. Your team has everything under control. The quarterly reports look great." "It's not about the reports," I tried to explain. "It's about feeling like myself again. I need this, Cam." He studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Okay. But I'm driving you and we're staying no more than 2 hours." That brief visit to Wilson Healthcare Solutions headquarters became a turning point in my recovery. Being back in the environment I'd created, seeing the team continuing the mission I'd established, ignited something in me. I returned home exhausted, but more determined than ever to reclaim my life. What I didn't realize was that while I focused on rebuilding my strength and capabilities, The Thompson family was facing a crisis that would soon reach a breaking point, one that would finally bring all the unspoken tensions into the open. 6 months after my surgery, life had found a new rhythm. I was back at Wilson Healthcare 4 days a week, though with shorter hours and more delegation than before. My cognitive functions had largely returned to normal, with only occasional word-finding difficulties when I was tired. The physical therapy continued, but I'd graduated from basic motor skills to rebuilding overall strength. Cameron had settled the lawsuit with Thompson Properties tenants against his father's wishes, implementing a comprehensive remediation plan and compensation package for affected employees. The settlement had been costly but fair, earning praise from business ethics watchdogs and restoring the company's reputation. What hadn't improved was our relationship with the Thompsons. Robert blamed Cameron for capitulating to the lawsuit demands. Their disagreements had escalated beyond professional differences to fundamental values conflicts. Cameron wanted to transform Thompson Properties into a model of sustainable, tenant-centered real estate management. Robert saw these changes as unnecessary expenses that undermined the bottom line. Elaine, meanwhile, had shifted her focus from my recovery to increasingly pointed questions about when we might start a family. The neurologist had cleared me physically, but Cameron and I had agreed to wait at least a year post-surgery before considering pregnancy. Time waits for no one, especially not women's fertility, Elaine remarked during one particularly tense Sunday dinner at their home. "You're already in your 30s, Emily." "We're not in a rush," Cameron replied before I could respond. "Emily's health is the priority right now." "Of course, dear, but surely the doctors have said it's our decision," I interrupted firmly. "And we'll make it when we're ready." The subject dropped temporarily but resurfaced later that evening when Elaine cornered me in the kitchen while I was helping clear dessert plates. "I hope you understand," she said in a low voice, "that Robert and I do want grandchildren eventually. It's important to us that the Thompson name continues." I set down the plates carefully. What Cameron and I decide about children is about our family, not the Thompson name. "You married into this family," she reminded me. "Certain traditions and expectations come with that." "I married your son, Elaine, not your family legacy." Her expression hardened. "That's becoming increasingly apparent." The tension followed us home that night. In our bedroom, I finally voiced what had been building for weeks. They're never going to accept me as an equal, are they? No matter what, I achieve or contribute. Cameron sighed heavily, sitting on the edge of our bed. I don't think they know how. Their worldview is so rigid. Old money, family connections, prescribed roles. You've never fit into their boxes. And you? I asked quietly. Do you resent that I don't fit their expectations? He looked at me with such genuine surprise that I immediately regretted the question. I fell in love with you because you defied expectations. Mine and everyone else's. You're the most authentic person I know. I sat beside him, leaning against his shoulder. I'm tired of trying to earn their approval. Then stop, he said simply. Live your life. Run your company. Love me. That's enough. We both knew it wasn't quite that simple, but the decision to stop seeking the Thompsons' validation brought a certain peace. I focused on my continued recovery and growing business, while Cameron concentrated on implementing his vision at Thompson Properties. 3 weeks later, an unexpected visitor arrived at my office. Robert Thompson himself, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. Mr. Thompson, my assistant announced, clearly flustered by his unscheduled appearance. He insists it's urgent. I gestured for her to send him in, curious about what could possibly bring my father-in-law to Wilson Healthcare headquarters. He'd never visited before, despite numerous company milestones and events. Emily, he said, remaining standing even after I offered him a seat. I need to speak with you privately. It's a family matter. I asked my assistant to hold my calls and close the office door. What's happened? Is Cameron all right? Cameron's fine, he said, finally taking a seat. He looked older suddenly, the confident business titan replaced by an anxious elderly man. It's about Elaine and me, and the company. Over the next 20 minutes, Robert revealed a situation that left me stunned. Thompson Properties was in serious financial trouble, far beyond what Cameron knew. The lawsuit settlement had strained resources, yes, but the deeper issue was years of Robert's financial mismanagement, hidden from everyone, including his son. I made some investments that didn't pan out, he explained vaguely. Used company, funds as collateral. The banks are calling in the loans. Does Cameron know any of this? Robert shook his head. I've kept separate books. He's been implementing all these costly upgrades, thinking we had the reserves to cover them. Why are you telling me instead of him? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Because you might be our only hope of saving the company. Your business is thriving. A strategic investment from Wilson Healthcare could stabilize Thompson Properties until we recover. I sat back, processing the audacity of his request. Let me understand this correctly. You've been hiding massive financial problems from your son, who is the CEO. You've previously suggested I'm only with Cameron for his money. And now you want me to bail out your company? He had the grace to look embarrassed. I know how it sounds, but this isn't just about me or Elaine. It's about Cameron's inheritance, his future. If Thompson Properties fails, he loses everything his grandfather and I built. No, I said firmly. He loses a company that's been mismanaged. He doesn't lose his talents, his ethics, or his potential. And he certainly doesn't lose me. So you won't help? Robert's expression hardened. I didn't say that. I'm saying I won't participate in hiding crucial information from my husband. You need to tell Cameron the truth, all of it. Then the three of us can discuss options. He stood abruptly. You don't understand what's at stake. I understand. Perfectly. Your pride is at stake. Your reputation. But keeping Cameron in the dark only makes the situation worse. Robert left without another word, and I immediately tried calling Cameron. When he didn't answer, I texted him to come to my office, as soon as possible. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't participate in Robert's deception. Cameron arrived an hour later, worried by my unusual summons. His face grew increasingly pale as I relayed Robert's visit and revelations. That can't be right, he said, pacing my office. I've seen the financial reports. We're tight after the settlement, but nowhere near insolvency. He admitted to keeping separate books, Cam. I think you need to do a deep dive into the actual finances, not just what he's shown you. The next week was a whirlwind of financial forensics. Cameron brought in independent auditors who uncovered the full extent of Robert's deception. The situation was dire. Thompson Properties was effectively bankrupt, with loans coming due that they had no means to repay. He leveraged everything, Cameron told me late one night, his voice hollow. Properties, investments, even their personal assets. And he's been falsifying reports to the board for years. What happens now? Without an immediate infusion of capital, bankruptcy, asset liquidation, probably criminal charges for financial fraud, the gravity of the situation settled over us. This wasn't just about a family business failing. It was about Robert potentially facing prison time at his age. Despite everything, I couldn't help feeling a twist of empathy for the proud man facing such a devastating fall. What do you want to do? I asked Cameron, taking his hand. He looked at me, conflict clear in his eyes. Part of me wants to let it all burn. After everything he's done, the secrets, the manipulation. But he's still my father, and my mother would be devastated. We have options, I said carefully. Wilson Healthcare has the liquidity to help, but it would have to be a proper business transaction, transparent, with fair terms and full disclosure to our board. I couldn't ask you to risk your company for this, Cameron protested. You're not asking. I'm offering. As a business decision, not just a family one. But Cameron, there would have to be conditions. Significant ones. As we stayed up through the night outlining a potential rescue plan, I realized we had reached a pivotal moment in our relationship with the Thompsons. The power dynamic that had defined our interactions for years was about to shift dramatically, and I wasn't entirely sure they were ready for what that would mean. The following day, we called an emergency meeting at the Thompson family home. The elegant living room where I'd first been scrutinized and found wanting years ago now felt like an appropriate setting for the reckoning that was about to occur. Elaine greeted us with her usual polite detachment, clearly unaware of the bombshell about to drop. Robert, however, looked like he hadn't slept in days, his usual commanding presence diminished by worry and shame. "What's this about?" Elaine asked as we all settled into the formal seating area. "Is everything all right?" Cameron, who had insisted on leading this conversation, took a deep breath. "No, Mom. Everything's not all right. Dad has something to tell you. And me. About the company." All eyes turned to Robert. For a moment, I thought he might continue the deception, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat. Slowly, painfully, he laid out the truth. The failed investments, the hidden debts, the falsified reports. Elaine's face was drained of color. "What are you saying, Robert? That we're broke?" "Not just broke," Cameron clarified, his voice tight with controlled anger. "The company is effectively bankrupt, and Dad has committed financial fraud that could result in criminal charges." "Criminal charges?" Elaine's hand flew to her throat. "Surely it's not that serious?" "It is," I said gently. Falsifying financial reports to a board of directors and shareholders is securities fraud. The reality of their situation sank in slowly. Elaine moved from denial to anger, lashing out at Robert for keeping her in the dark. For perhaps the first time, I felt genuine sympathy for her. Discovering your husband of 40 years had been... Living a financial lie was devastating. After the initial shock subsided, Cameron outlined the situation in stark terms. Without immediate intervention, Thompson Properties would collapse within weeks. The family's personal assets, many of which had been used as collateral for business loans, would be seized. Their reputation in Portland's business community would be irreparably damaged. "What can we possibly do?" Elaine asked, her voice hollow. Cameron looked at me and I nodded. "Now comes the difficult part." "Emily and I have a proposal," he began. "Wilson Healthcare has the liquidity to rescue Thompson Properties. We've worked out a plan that would satisfy the creditors, prevent bankruptcy, and potentially save the company." Robert's head snapped up, hope flickering across his face. "You're going to help?" "We're offering to help," I clarified. "But there are conditions." "What kind of conditions?" Elaine asked suspiciously. I leaned forward, meeting Robert's gaze directly. "First, full financial transparency going forward. Second, you both must retire completely from Thompson Properties. No advisory roles, no board seats. Third, the company will be restructured under Cameron's leadership with a new board that he selects." Robert's face flushed with anger. "You're forcing us out of our own company?" "The company you've driven to the brink of collapse," Cameron reminded him sharply. "This isn't a hostile takeover, Dad. This is a rescue operation." "And what happens to us?" Elaine asked, her voice small. "Where are we supposed to live if everything is seized as collateral?" "That's part of the proposal," I continued. "Wilson Healthcare would purchase your family home at fair market value, allowing you to pay off the mortgage and associated liens. You could continue living here, but the property would technically belong to my company." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. They had spent years looking down on me as a gold digger, and now I would own their home. "This is humiliating," Robert muttered. "It's reality," Cameron replied. "And it's a better outcome than you deserve after lying to everyone for years." Elaine's tears started flowing freely. "Do we have any other options?" "Bankruptcy," Cameron said flatly. Asset liquidation, potential criminal proceedings. And this arrangement, Robert asked, would prevent that? I nodded. The financial intervention would satisfy the creditors. As for potential criminal charges, we would need to consult legal counsel about the best approach. Full disclosure to authorities with a negotiated settlement might be possible. You've thought of everything, Robert said bitterly. We've tried. 2, I agreed. This situation affects all of us, including Cameron's future. We're not doing this out of spite. Though no one would blame us if we were, Cameron added, unable to keep the edge from his voice. Elaine dabbed at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. When do you need our answer? By tomorrow, I said. The Wilson Healthcare Board meets the day after, and I'll need their approval for this level of investment. And you think they'll agree? Robert asked skeptically. Thompson Properties, despite its current financial troubles, has valuable assets and a strong portfolio. Properly managed, it could be a sound investment for us. And I hesitated, then decided honesty was best. Frankly, our board respects me enough to approve a plan I believe in. The subtle reminder of my professional standing hung in the air. For years, the Thompsons had dismissed my business acumen, despite evidence of my success. Now their financial salvation depended on it. We left them to discuss our proposal privately, driving home in contemplative silence. Once inside our house, Cameron finally spoke. Are we doing the right thing? I considered the question carefully. From a business perspective, yes. From a family perspective, I'm not sure there is a right thing in this situation, but it's better than the alternatives. He ran his hands through his hair. I keep thinking about what Dad said, that it's humiliating. Part of me feels guilty for essentially taking over their legacy. You're saving their legacy, I corrected, gently. The company would disappear completely otherwise. And the house? Is that really necessary? I sighed. It's the largest single asset they have that's tied up in debt. If we don't resolve it, the bank will foreclose regardless. At least this way they can continue living there. As tenants in a property owned by their daughter-in-law, he pointed out. Would you prefer they end up in our guest room? I asked, managing a small smile despite the seriousness of the situation. He laughed despite himself. God, no. Can you imagine? That night, neither of us slept well. The weight of potentially becoming my in-laws' financial savior, and effectively their landlord, wasn't lost on me. The role reversal was profound. After years of subtle and not-so-subtle indications that I wasn't good enough for their son or their social circle, I now held their future in my hands. The call came earlier than expected. At 7 a.m., Robert's name appeared on my phone screen. Accept your terms, he said without preamble, his voice strained. All of them. I'll start the paperwork today, I replied, keeping my tone neutral and professional. Emily, he added just before hanging up. Thank you. 2 simple words that had never before passed his lips in relation to me. Not when I'd supported Cameron through graduate school, not when I'd built a successful business, not even when I'd fought my way back from brain surgery. It had taken financial ruin to finally extract an expression of gratitude from Robert Thompson, as I ended the call. I realized this arrangement would fundamentally alter our family dynamics forever. The question was whether the Thompsons could adapt to their new reality, and whether the wounds of the past could ever truly heal. The next week was a flurry of legal meetings, financial negotiations, and corporate governance decisions. The Wilson Healthcare Board approved my proposal with surprising enthusiasm. Several members had real estate backgrounds and recognized the potential value in acquiring Thompson Properties assets at their current distressed prices. What I hadn't anticipated was the resistance from an unexpected quarter, my own executive team at Wilson Healthcare. This is a significant departure from our core business, argued Diane, my COO, during a tense leadership meeting. We're a healthcare company, not real estate investors. It's diversification, I countered. And there are natural synergies. We already lease clinical spaces in various properties. Controlling our own real estate could reduce operating costs. Long term. The optics are concerning, added Marcus, our head of public relations. It could look like we're using company funds for a personal matter, bailing out your in-laws. The criticism stung, particularly because it echoed my own private concerns. I'd worked diligently to ensure the deal was structured as a sound business transaction, with appropriate returns projected for Wilson Healthcare. But the personal connection was undeniable. I understand the concerns, I acknowledged. That's why I've recused myself from certain aspects of the negotiation, and why we've brought in independent analysts to validate the terms. This is a business decision that happens to have personal implications, not the other way around. After 2 hours of debate, the leadership team reluctantly agreed to proceed, though I sensed lingering doubts. As I packed up my materials after the meeting, Diane lingered behind. "You know I trust your judgment, Emily," she said quietly. "But are you sure this isn't about proving something to the Thompsons?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" She chose her words carefully. "You've mentioned before how they've never fully accepted you. I just want to make sure this rescue isn't partially motivated by a desire to change that dynamic." I considered denying it outright, but Diane deserved honesty. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some satisfaction in being the one to save them after years of condescension. But that's not why I'm doing this. The business case is solid, and it's the right thing for Cameron. Diane nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Just be careful. Family and business make for complicated bedfellows." Meanwhile, Cameron was facing his own challenges at Thompson Properties. The board had initially resisted the restructuring plan, particularly the complete removal of Robert from all decision-making roles. Several long-standing board members, friends of Robert's from his early days building the company, threatened to resign in protest. "Let them," I advised when Cameron called to vent his frustration. "This is the perfect opportunity to build a board that shares your vision, not your father's. It feels like I'm erasing decades of history," he admitted. "Dad may have made terrible financial decisions, but he built this company from nothing. And you're ensuring it survives to see its next chapter. That honors his legacy more than letting it collapse would." The negotiations with the banks proved equally challenging. Years of Robert's financial manipulation had destroyed trust, and the lenders initially pushed for immediate liquidation rather than restructuring. It took 3 days of intense meetings, with both our legal teams working around the clock, to hammer out terms they would accept. Through it all, Robert and Elaine remained conspicuously silent. They attended required meetings, signed necessary documents, but offered little input or engagement. Their resignation to the situation had an unsettling quality, as if they were simply going through motions while privately nursing wounds and resentments. 2 weeks into the process, as we neared finalization of the agreements, Elaine requested a private meeting with me. Curious and slightly apprehensive, I agreed to meet her for lunch at a small cafe halfway between our offices. She arrived precisely on time, impeccably dressed as always, though I noticed subtle changes. Her jewelry, less ostentatious, her handbag a previous season's design rather than her usual latest acquisition. "Thank you for meeting me," she began after we'd ordered. "I know how busy you must be, handling 2 companies essentially." "I have an excellent team," I replied neutrally. "What did you want to discuss?" She folded her hands on the table, her wedding ring catching the light. For the first time, I noticed it was the only ring she wore, her usual array of diamond bands notably absent. "I want to talk about the house," she said directly. "The purchase agreement." I tensed slightly. "The terms are fair, Elaine. We're paying market value despite the circumstances." "I'm not questioning the price," she clarified. "It's about certain personal items, family heirlooms, artwork, things that have been in the Thompson family for generations. I hadn't considered this aspect. In my mind, we were purchasing the property itself, not its contents. The furnishings and personal belongings would remain yours, of course. Some items are built-in or permanent fixtures, she explained. The library paneling was imported from an English estate in the 1920s. The master bedroom fireplace mantel belonged to Cameron's great-grandmother. The rose garden was planted when Robert's mother died. As she continued listing features of the home with sentimental significance, I realized something unexpected. Elaine truly loved that house, not just as a status symbol, but as the repository of family history and memories. I see, I said when she finally paused. You're concerned about preserving these elements. She nodded, a hint of vulnerability showing through her carefully maintained facade. If the property changes hands, there's no guarantee what might happen in the future. New owners might renovate, remove historical features. I understand. Your concern, I said thoughtfully. We could add provisions to the agreement specifying certain historical elements that must be preserved, regardless of future ownership. Relief flooded her face. You would do that? Of course. Family history matters, Elaine. I've always understood that, even if you didn't think I did. She had the grace to look slightly abashed. After a moment of silence, she spoke again, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. You know, when Cameron first brought you home, I was certain you wouldn't last 6 months. I raised an eyebrow. Because I wasn't from the right background? Partially, she admitted. But more because you seemed so independent. Most of the women in our circle understand the compromises expected in marriages like ours. I didn't think you would adapt. I didn't adapt, I pointed out. I remained exactly who I was. Yes, she agreed, surprising me. And Cameron changed instead. Became more himself, somehow. Less the son Robert and I tried to shape, more the man he wanted to be. It was perhaps the most insightful thing I'd ever heard Elaine say, and the closest she'd come to acknowledging that my influence on her son had been positive. We've both made each other better, I said carefully. That's what partnership should be. She nodded, then reached into her purse and withdrew a small velvet box. There's one more thing. This has been in the Thompson family for 4 generations. It should go to Cameron's wife. She pushed the box across the table. Inside was an exquisite emerald pendant on a delicate gold chain. I can't accept this, I said automatically. Yes, you can, she insisted. Not because you're saving our company or buying our home, but because you're Cameron's choice. I should have recognized the significance of that years ago. As I carefully closed the box, I realized we had reached a turning point. Not friendship. Exactly, but perhaps the beginning of genuine respect. It had taken financial disaster and complete upheaval for Elaine to see me as worthy of her family's heirlooms, but the recognition, however belated, felt meaningful. What I didn't yet know was that Robert was not adjusting to our new reality with the same grace as his wife. While Elaine was making peace with the changed family dynamics, Robert was quietly seething and planning a last-ditch effort to regain control that would test all of us in ways we never expected. As the date approached for finalizing the agreements, an unexpected invitation arrived from Elaine. Formal cards requesting our presence at their 40th wedding anniversary celebration. Is she serious? I asked Cameron, holding the embossed invitation. In the middle of all this? Apparently, he replied, looking equally perplexed. Mom called to insist we attend. Said they've been planning it for months and see no reason to cancel. It feels tone-deaf, celebrating their marriage while we're restructuring their finances. That's my parents, maintaining appearances at all costs, Cameron said with a wry smile. Though I'm surprised they want us there, given the circumstances. I had my doubts about the wisdom of attending such an event, but declining would only create additional tension. So the following Saturday, we found ourselves walking into the Portland Country Club, where the Thompsons had been members for decades. The ballroom was elegantly decorated in silver and white, with photographs from Robert and Elaine's 4 decades together displayed on easels throughout the space. Despite the financial crisis unfolding behind the scenes, they had spared no expense for this public celebration. "Emily? Cameron." Elaine greeted us with air kisses. She wore a stunning silver gown and seemed determined to play the role of contented celebrant. "So glad you could make it." Robert stood beside her, impeccable in his tuxedo, a fixed smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. He nodded curtly in our direction, but said nothing. The event proceeded with uncomfortable normality. Cocktails, dinner, toasts from longtime friends praising Robert's business acumen, and the couple's social contributions to Portland society. No mention of financial troubles or company restructuring, just polite fiction maintained for the benefit of their social circle. During dinner, I found myself seated next to Lawrence Whitmore, a prominent Portland developer who had worked with Thompson Properties for years. "Fascinating developments with your healthcare company," he remarked casually, buttering a roll. "I hear you're branching into real estate acquisition." I maintained a neutral expression. "Wilson Healthcare is diversifying its investment portfolio, yes." "Interesting timing," he continued, watching me carefully, "especially with Thompson Properties experiencing challenges." The implication was clear. Word had begun to spread about the Thompson financial issues, despite our efforts to handle the situation discreetly. "Business landscapes evolve," I replied diplomatically. "Companies must adapt." "Indeed." He sipped his wine thoughtfully. "Though I must say, Robert seems to have a rather different perspective on the situation than what I've heard elsewhere." My skin prickled with sudden awareness. "Oh, he's been meeting with several of us this past week, longtime associates, potential investors, discussing alternative refinancing options for Thompson Properties." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Robert had agreed to our terms, signed preliminary documents, all while apparently seeking other solutions behind our backs. "I see," I managed, mind racing. "That's certainly his prerogative until final agreements are signed." "Of course," Lawrence agreed smoothly, though he presented the situation as quite urgent. Something about preventing a hostile takeover by outside interests. Outside interests. That would be me, his son's wife, the woman trying to save his company from bankruptcy. I excused myself as soon as politely possible and sought out Cameron, who was chatting with college friends near the bar. Pulling him aside, I relayed Lawrence's information in a hushed voice. "That doesn't make sense," Cameron said, brow furrowed. "Where would Dad suddenly find alternative investors? Everyone we approached initially turned us down because of the debt load." "I don't know, but we need to talk to him. Now." We found Robert holding court near the dance floor, regaling a group of admirers with an old business anecdote. Seeing us approach, his expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Dad, can we speak privately for a moment?" Cameron asked, maintaining a cordial tone despite his evident tension. "Now isn't really the time, son. We're celebrating." "It's important," I insisted quietly. With visible reluctance, Robert excused himself and led us to a small anteroom off the main ballroom. Once the door closed behind us, his affable demeanor vanished. "What's so urgent it couldn't wait until tomorrow?" he demanded. "Are you seeking alternative financing for Thompson Properties?" Cameron asked directly. Robert's momentary hesitation confirmed our suspicions before he spoke. "I'm exploring options. That's what any responsible business owner would do." "We have signed preliminary agreements," I reminded him. "Wilson Healthcare's board has approved the transaction. The banks are on board." "Nothing is final," Robert countered. "And frankly, I've had second thoughts about the arrangement. The terms are unnecessarily punitive." "Punitive?" Cameron echoed incredulously. We're saving the company you nearly destroyed. Through mismanagement and fraud. Robert's face flushed with anger. Watch your tone. I built that company from nothing while you were still in diapers. And then you nearly burned it to the ground, Cameron shot back. What's really going on? Here, Dad. Who's offering this mysterious alternative financing? Robert straightened his tuxedo jacket, a gesture I recognized as his attempt to regain composure. Several interested parties see value in Thompson properties that apparently escaped your notice. They're willing to provide capital without the extreme conditions you're imposing. What parties? I pressed. Lawrence Whitmore? Because he seemed surprised by your claims. My business arrangements are no longer your concern, Robert said coldly. I've decided to pursue a different path forward. Cameron stepped closer to his father, voice lowered. There are signed agreements. Dad, trying to back out now could constitute fraud. Again. Do you really want to risk legal consequences on top of everything else? Are you threatening me? Robert's voice rose dangerously. I'm stating facts, Cameron replied evenly. We offered a solution that protects the company, prevents bankruptcy, and shields you and Mom from potential criminal charges. If you found legitimate alternative financing under better terms, fine. Show us the details, the term sheets, the investor commitments. But if you're bluffing to try to renegotiate our deal... The door opened abruptly, and Elaine appeared, her pleasant, social mask slipping as she took in the scene before her. What's happening? People are starting to notice your absence. Robert waved dismissively. Nothing to concern yourself with. Just a business disagreement. On our anniversary? Elaine's voice took on a hard edge I'd never heard before. You promised. Robert, no business tonight. Your husband is trying to back out of our agreement, I explained, unable to maintain the pretense any longer. He claims to have found alternative investors. Elaine's gaze darted between her husband and us, comprehension dawning slowly. Is this true, Robert? His silence was confirmation enough. We should discuss this tomorrow, Cameron said, making a visible effort to control his frustration. This isn't the place. No, Elaine said firmly, closing the door behind her. Whatever this is, we're resolving it now. I will not have our anniversary ruined by more financial scheming. What followed was one of the most uncomfortable conversations I'd ever witnessed. Elaine, apparently at her breaking point, demanded answers from Robert about these supposed new investors. His evasiveness only fueled her increasing anger. There are no other investors, are there? She finally challenged him. This is just your pride, your inability to accept help from Cameron and Emily. Their help comes with unacceptable conditions, Robert insisted. They want to strip us of all authority, all dignity. And what dignity will bankruptcy bring? Elaine interrupted. What authority will you have when we're selling our possessions to pay legal fees? The three of them continued arguing, decades, of family dynamics and resentments bubbling to the surface. I stood silently, feeling like an intruder in this intensely personal moment, yet unable to leave. Finally, red-faced and trembling with emotion, Robert turned to me. This is all your fault, he seethed. You've turned my son against me, convinced him to betray his family legacy. You never belonged in our world, just a gold digger who got lucky. The ballroom suddenly seemed very quiet, and I realized the door had opened again. Several guests stood frozen in the doorway, having clearly overheard Robert's outburst. Among them was my mother, who had arrived late to the celebration. The sea. Silence that followed was excruciating. I felt Cameron's hand find mine, squeezing tightly in wordless support. I think, I said quietly, maintaining composure despite the public humiliation, that we should leave now. As we turned to go, Elaine's voice stopped us. No, she said, her tone icy and directed at her husband. Robert will apologize, now. But I didn't want his forced apology. What I wanted was to finally end this cycle of judgment and resentment. And in that moment, looking at Robert Thompson's stubborn, angry face, I knew exactly how to do it. The country club ballroom had fallen into an uncomfortable silence. Dozens of Portland's elite stood frozen, witnessing what should have been a private family meltdown. My mother had pushed through the crowd to stand protectively at my side, her expression thunderous. "I think we've all heard enough," she said, her normally gentle voice carrying an edge I rarely heard. "Emily, Cameron, let's go." But I remained rooted in place, a sudden clarity washing over me. For years, I had tried to earn the Thompsons' respect and acceptance, believing that my accomplishments would eventually overcome their prejudice. Now, I realized the fundamental flaw in that approach. Their rejection had never been about my worth. It had been about their own insecurities, their rigid worldview, their fear of change. "Actually," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me, "I have something to say first." Robert's face registered momentary surprise. Before settling back into defiance, Elaine looked mortified, her carefully orchestrated celebration in shambles. "Mr. Thompson," I began, addressing him formally as I had in our earliest encounters, "you've made your opinion of me abundantly clear. For 7 years, I've endured your thinly veiled contempt, your dismissal of my accomplishments, your certainty that I married your son for financial gain." I took a step toward him, conscious of the audience but speaking only to him. The irony, of course, is that I fell in love with Cameron despite his family's wealth, not because of it. I built my own company without your connections or resources. And now, in what must be the ultimate cosmic joke, I find myself in a position to save the business you've nearly destroyed. Robert opened his mouth to interrupt, but I continued before he could speak. "But I'm tired of trying to prove myself to you, so I'm going to make this very simple." I turned to address Cameron, who watched me with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "The original deal is off," I stated clearly. "Wilson Healthcare will not be acquiring Thompson Properties or restructuring its debt." Cameron's eyes widened. Robert's expression shifted to something like satisfaction, until I continued. "Instead," I said, reaching into my clutch purse and removing a folded document, "I'm going to do something much more straightforward." I handed the document to Robert. "This is a certified bank check, drawn from my personal accounts, not Wilson Healthcare's, for the exact amount remaining on your home mortgage plus associated liens and penalties." Robert stared at the check, his hands trembling slightly. The sum was substantial, representing years of my own earnings and savings, but not nearly as large as the corporate rescue package we had planned. "I'm paying off your mortgage," I explained, for the benefit of the stunned onlookers as much as the Thompsons. "Not buying your home, not taking ownership, simply clearing the debt. The property remains in your name." "Why would you do this?" Robert finally managed, genuine confusion replacing his anger. "Because it's the one thing you can't dismiss as a business strategy or corporate takeover. It's a personal gesture that you can either accept with grace or reject with the same contempt you've always shown me. Either way, I'm done seeking your approval." I turned to Elaine, whose composed facade had completely crumbled. "The house and its history remain yours, as they should. All those family heirlooms and memories stay exactly where they belong." "And Thompson Properties?" Cameron asked quietly. I met his gaze steadily. "That's between you and your father now. Wilson Healthcare will step back from any acquisition. Whatever you decide, I'll support you personally, but my company will no longer be involved." The reality of what this meant sank in slowly. By removing the corporate element, I had transformed the situation from a business takeover to a family matter. Cameron would still need to decide how much he wanted to fight for his father's company, but without the complication of my direct involvement. "You can't be serious," Robert said, still staring at the check. "I've never been more serious," I replied evenly. "Consider it my anniversary gift to you both, freedom from at least one financial burden." My mother stepped forward, linking her arm through mine. "I think it's time we left," she said firmly. This time, I allowed her to guide me toward the exit, Cameron following close behind. As we reached the door, Elaine's voice stopped us. "Emily, wait." She crossed the room with remarkable composure, given the circumstances. When she reached me, she did something she had never done before. She embraced me, genuinely and without reservation. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just for the money, but for loving my son enough to do this." I returned her embrace briefly before stepping back. "Take care of each other," I said simply. The drive home passed in processing silence. It wasn't until we were safely inside our own house that Cameron finally spoke. "I can't believe you did that." "Are you angry?" I asked, suddenly uncertain. "No," he said, pulling me into his arms. "I'm in awe of you. That check represented most of your personal savings, didn't it?" I nodded against his chest. "It seemed like the cleanest solution. Your parents keep their home and dignity. You're free to handle the company's situation without conflicting loyalties. And I'm finally free from trying to meet impossible expectations. But your hard-earned money is just money," I finished for him. "I'll earn more. Wilson Healthcare is doing well, and I still have my shares. This way, there's no confusion about motives or business ethics, just one family member helping another in a time of need." The following weeks brought seismic shifts in our family dynamics. Free from the pressure of my corporate involvement, Cameron and Robert reached a compromise regarding Thompson Properties. Cameron would take over as CEO with full operational control, while Robert retained a symbolic board position with no voting rights. The company would undergo restructuring, with new investors Cameron had independently secured. Elaine underwent perhaps the most surprising transformation. With the immediate financial crisis resolved, she seemed to shed decades of rigid social performance. She began volunteering at a women's shelter, using her event planning skills for fundraisers rather than social climbing. When we met for lunch a month after the anniversary debacle, she seemed lighter, more authentic than I'd ever seen her. "I've spent 40 years focused on appearances," she confided. "What people thought of us, our standing in the community. It took nearly losing everything to realize how empty that was." "Better late than never," I said without judgment. She smiled ruefully. "Robert is adjusting more slowly. His pride took a significant blow, but he's trying, in his way. He asks about your health now, you know. Actually seems concerned. It was a small step, but meaningful coming from a man who had spent years barely acknowledging my existence except to criticize." 6 months after the anniversary, Robert and Elaine hosted a small family dinner. Just the four of us, no pretense, no social performance. As we finished dessert, Robert cleared his throat awkwardly. "I've been doing some thinking," he began, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "About what happened, about how I've behaved over the years." We all waited, giving him space to continue at his own pace. "I was wrong about you, Emily," he finally said, meeting my eyes directly. "I made judgments based on outdated values, I suppose. Assumptions about your background, your intentions." It wasn't quite an apology, but from Robert Thompson, this acknowledgement represented monumental growth. "Thank you for saying that," I replied simply. "The mortgage," he continued, his voice gruff with emotion. "We're going to pay you back. I've set up a repayment plan." I shook my head. "That's not necessary. It was a gift, not a loan." "I insist," he said firmly. "My pride can accept help in a crisis, but not charity in the long term." I recognized that this was important to him, a way to restore his sense of autonomy and self-respect. "All right, whatever you're comfortable with." As Cameron and I drove home that night, I reflected on the strange journey of the past 7 years. From being judged as a gold digger to becoming the family's financial savior, from seeking approval to finding my own peace, regardless of others' opinions. "What are you thinking about?" Cameron asked, reaching for my hand across the console. "How life rarely turns out as expected," I replied. "When I met you, I never imagined I'd someday pay off your parents' mortgage, or that your father would ever admit he was wrong about me. When I met you, I knew you were exceptional," Cameron said, squeezing my hand. "I just didn't know exactly how." 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected delivery at my office. A small, elegantly wrapped package with a card in Robert's distinctive handwriting. Inside the box was an antique gold pocket watch, clearly a family heirloom. The note read simply, "This belonged to my grandfather, who built his business from nothing, just as you have. He would have admired your integrity and determination. I should have seen these qualities sooner. With respect and gratitude, Robert." I placed the watch carefully on my desk, visible from my chair, not as a trophy or vindication, but as a reminder that people can change, that relationships can heal, and that sometimes the most powerful response to judgment is neither confrontation nor capitulation, but simply living your truth until others can finally see it too. The gold digger they once disdained had never been interested in their gold at all, only in building something meaningful and being recognized for her own worth. In the end, it wasn't their approval that mattered, but the self-respect I'd maintained throughout. That was the true wealth no one could ever take from me. A year after the anniversary incident, life had settled into a rhythm I never could have anticipated. Thompson Properties was thriving under Cameron's leadership, implementing the sustainable practices and tenant-centered approach he had long advocated. Wilson Healthcare Solutions had expanded to 12 cities across the country, our mobile healthcare model becoming something of a case study in healthcare innovation. What had changed most dramatically, however, was my relationship with the Thompsons. The transformation wasn't immediate or perfect. Real life rarely provides such tidy resolutions. Instead, it was a gradual evolution marked by small moments of growth and occasional backsliding. Robert had begun repaying the mortgage money as promised, sending monthly checks with brief notes updating me on his activities. After decades of defining himself solely through his business achievements, he was exploring new interests: woodworking, local history, even volunteering at a youth business mentorship program. The irony of Robert Thompson advising young entrepreneurs on ethical business practices wasn't lost on me, but perhaps his hard-learned lessons made him uniquely qualified. One Tuesday afternoon, my assistant notified me that Robert was in the reception area, asking if I had a few minutes to talk. Curious and slightly apprehensive, I agreed to see him. He entered my office with none of his former commanding presence, his demeanor respectful rather than entitled. After declining my offer of coffee, he got straight to the point. "I've been approached about writing a memoir," he explained, sitting across from my desk. "About building Thompson Properties, the challenges faced, lessons learned." "That sounds interesting," I replied, unsure why this required a personal visit. He shifted uncomfortably. "The publisher is particularly interested in the recent difficulties, the near bankruptcy and restructuring. They feel it adds a redemptive arc to the narrative." Understanding dawned. "And you'd need to discuss my role in all of that." "Yes." He met my eyes directly. "I wanted your permission before proceeding. It would mean discussing the mortgage situation, our prior misconceptions about you." His consideration surprised me. The Robert Thompson of 2 years ago would never have sought my input before making such a decision. "I appreciate you asking," I said sincerely. "I don't object to being included in your story as long as it's truthful." "That's just it," he replied, his expression troubled. "I've been trying to write the early chapters, about when Cameron first introduced you to us, and I'm struggling to reconcile my memory with my current understanding." "What do you mean?" He sighed heavily. "I remember perceiving you as opportunistic, calculating, someone looking to benefit from our family's position. But looking back, there was nothing in your behavior that actually suggested that. It was all my own preconceptions. The admission, so frank and self-aware, momentarily left me speechless. I suppose I'm asking, he continued hesitantly, for your perspective on those early interactions, to ensure the book reflects what actually happened, not just my biased recollection. And so began an unexpected collaboration. Over the next few months, Robert and I met regularly to discuss the past, comparing our memories of key moments in the family's history. These conversations were sometimes uncomfortable, occasionally heated, but ultimately healing in a way I hadn't anticipated. I remember the first dinner at our home, Robert recalled during one such meeting. I asked about your father, and you explained he wasn't in the picture. And you immediately made assumptions about my upbringing, I added. He nodded, wincing slightly. I categorized you instantly. Single mother, community college, working class background, none of which fit our usual social circle. What would you write differently now? I asked, genuinely curious. Robert considered this carefully. I'd acknowledge that I mistook the difference for deficiency, that I failed to recognize how your background, having to work for everything, supporting yourself through school, had created exactly the kind of strength and determination that builds successful entrepreneurs. These conversations extended beyond the book project, gradually expanding to include Elaine and Cameron in family discussions that had once seemed impossible. We began a tradition of monthly Sunday dinners, rotating between our homes, where conversation flowed more naturally than it ever had during those formal, strained meals of the past. During one such dinner at the Thompson home, Elaine surprised me by asking for my input on a fundraising strategy for the women's shelter where she volunteered. Your business expertise would be invaluable, she explained. We're trying to expand services, but donor fatigue is a real challenge. I'd be happy to help, I replied, touched by her request. Actually, Wilson Healthcare might be a good partner. For the shelter, we've been looking to expand our community outreach programs. As we discussed potential collaboration, I caught Robert watching us with a thoughtful expression. What? I asked, noticing his scrutiny. I was just thinking, he said. How much opportunity we wasted over the years, the partnerships we could have built, the ideas we could have exchanged if I hadn't been so... He trailed off, searching for the right word. Stubborn? Cameron suggested with a grin. Prejudiced, Robert corrected soberly. About what success looks like, who deserves a seat at the table. The candor of his self-assessment reflected how far he'd come from the man who had publicly called me a gold digger just a year earlier. Meanwhile, Cameron and I had been discussing an important personal decision, whether to start a family. My health had stabilized completely since the surgery, with my neurologist giving full clearance for pregnancy if we chose that path. Are you sure you're ready? Cameron asked one evening as we sat on our back deck, watching the sunset. Between running Wilson Healthcare and helping Dad with his book, you're already juggling a lot. I'm not sure anyone's ever completely ready, I replied. But yes, I think it's time. My company is stable. Your restructuring of Thompson Properties is going well. And honestly, watching your parents evolve has made me think a lot about what kind of family we want to create. One with less judgment and more acceptance, I hope, Cameron said, only half joking. Exactly. And seeing how people can change, even after decades of rigid thinking, it gives me hope for the world our child would grow up in. 3 months later, I found myself sitting in my doctor's office, staring at a positive pregnancy test result. As I drove to Cameron's office to share the news, I felt a surprising impulse to call Elaine afterward. The thought would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier, but now it felt natural to include her in this joyful moment. Elaine's reaction to the pregnancy news exceeded all expectations. She wept openly, hugging me with genuine warmth, then immediately began talking about nursery designs and family traditions she hoped to share with her grandchild. "I never thought," she started, then caught herself. "I'm just so grateful to be included, Emily. I know we haven't always deserved your generosity." "Family isn't about deserving," I replied, surprising myself with the sentiment. "It's about belonging, even when it's complicated." As my pregnancy progressed, Robert completed his memoir manuscript. True to his word, he showed me the chapters that discussed our relationship and the financial crisis, requesting my feedback before submitting the final draft to his publisher. The honesty of his writing was both touching and somewhat surreal. Reading his candid acknowledgement of his prejudices, his admission of financial mismanagement, and most surprisingly, his recognition of how his rigid worldview had limited his own growth for decades. "Do you really want to publish this?" I asked after reading the final draft. "It's very self-critical. It's truthful," he replied simply. What good is a memoir that doesn't acknowledge one's failings as well as successes? The book, titled Reconstructing Success: A Builder's Second Education, was published just weeks before my due date. Surprisingly, it received positive reviews, praised for its unflinching honesty about privilege, prejudice, and personal growth later in life. At 7 months pregnant, I attended Robert's first book signing event. Watching him discuss his journey with humility and self-awareness, I reflected on the remarkable transformation our family had undergone. The gold digger accusation hurled at that anniversary party had become, paradoxically, the catalyst for genuine connection, forcing all of us to confront uncomfortable truths and rebuild relationships on a foundation of mutual respect rather than obligation or pretense. As I rested a hand on my growing belly, feeling the flutter of new life within, I realized we had all been digging for something far more valuable than gold: authenticity, understanding, and the courage to change, even when change seems impossible. When our daughter Sophia was born on a rainy spring morning, the waiting room contained a sight I once would have thought impossible. Robert and Elaine Thompson sitting companionably with my mother, all three equally anxious to meet the newest member of our blended family. The territorial lines that had once divided them, wealth, background, education, had gradually dissolved over the 9 months of my pregnancy, replaced by the shared anticipation of new life. The labor had been long and challenging, testing my still recovering body. Through it all, Cameron remained my steadfast partner, his quiet support never wavering. When the doctor finally placed our daughter in my arms, the exhaustion of the previous 18 hours vanished in an instant. She was perfect: tiny fingers, rosebud lips, and a determined furrow to her brow that Cameron immediately claimed she had inherited from me. "Would you like to meet your grandparents?" I whispered to her, still marveling at her existence. "They've been waiting a very long time." My mother was the first to hold her, tears streaming unashamedly down her face as she cradled the granddaughter she had once feared she might never have. "She has your chin," Mom said softly, tracing Sophia's profile with a gentle finger. "And your father's eyes." It was rare for my mother to mention my father, who had walked out when I was 8. That she would acknowledge his connection to Sophia spoke volumes about her journey toward healing old wounds. When it was Elaine's turn, I noticed her hands trembling slightly as Cameron carefully transferred the baby. "Support her head," she murmured, though the instruction was unnecessary. "Oh, she's beautiful. Absolutely perfect." The first time I placed Sophia in Robert's arms, I witnessed something remarkable: the complete dissolution of the stern, judgmental facade he had maintained for decades. His eyes filled with tears as he gazed at his granddaughter, this tiny being unencumbered by preconceptions or family history. "She has your determination," he whispered, gently touching her clenched fist. "Look how firmly she holds on." In that moment, watching this once imposing man completely undone by 7 pounds of newborn humanity, I realized how thoroughly our family narrative had been rewritten. The man who had once called me a gold digger was now cradling my daughter with a tenderness I never could have imagined him capable of expressing. The hospital room became a neutral territory where past grievances seemed to matter less with each passing hour. My mother and Elaine compared notes on baby care across generations, while Robert anxiously consulted his phone about the latest recommendations for infant safety. Cameron moved between all of them, capturing photos and facilitating this new, fragile harmony. In the months that followed, parenthood transformed Cameron and me in the usual ways: sleep deprivation, overwhelming, love, the constant juggling of responsibilities. But it also cemented the new family dynamic we had been building. My mother and the Thompsons developed an unexpected friendship, bonding over their shared adoration of Sophia and finding common ground despite their different backgrounds. Elaine, who had once filled her days with charity luncheons and country club events, now happily spent hours on the floor of our living room playing with Sophia. Her designer outfits were frequently adorned with baby spit-up, a badge she wore with surprising pride. She became an invaluable support during those early months, offering to watch Sophia so I could shower or nap, bringing home-cooked meals, and never once criticizing my parenting choices as I had feared she might. Robert's transformation continued to unfold in equally surprising ways. When Sophia was 3 months old, he arrived at our home with a handcrafted wooden rocking horse. "I've been taking woodworking classes," he explained somewhat sheepishly as he carried the exquisite piece into our living room. "Thought she might enjoy this when she's a bit older." The craftsmanship was extraordinary: smooth curves, hand-painted details, and safety features that revealed hours of research and care. Cameron examined it with obvious admiration. "Dad, this is incredible. I had no idea you were interested in woodworking." "Neither did I," Robert admitted. "Needed something to do with my hands since stepping back from day-to-day operations. I enjoy creating something tangible, something that will last." This new version of Robert, reflective, creative, invested in building rather than acquiring, was someone I was still getting to know. The man who had once defined himself solely through corporate achievements now spent weekends in a workshop, crafting toys for his granddaughter. When Sophia was 6 months old, Robert's book became a surprise bestseller, resonating with business, leaders facing their own reckonings in a changing world. He was invited to speak at conferences and universities about ethical business practices and the danger of rigid thinking, topics that would have seemed incongruous with the Robert Thompson of old. During one particularly prestigious speaking engagement at Harvard Business School, Robert surprised everyone by asking me to join him on stage for the Q&A portion. "My daughter-in-law is the true expert on building an ethical business from the ground up," he explained to the audience. "I learned most of what I'm sharing today by watching her example." As we fielded questions together, the easy rapport between us wasn't performative. It was the result of countless conversations, disagreements, and eventually, mutual respect that had developed organically over time. "Did you ever imagine we'd be doing this together?" Robert asked as we left the auditorium afterward. "Never," I admitted with a laugh. "But then, I never imagined paying off your mortgage either. Life takes unexpected turns." He nodded thoughtfully. "The mortgage payments? I've been thinking about that. I want to redirect them." "What do you mean?" "Instead of repaying you directly, I'd like to establish a scholarship fund in Sophia's name for nursing students from single-parent homes." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, acknowledging both my professional background and my upbringing, left me momentarily speechless. "That would be wonderful," I finally managed. "Mom would be touched too." On the flight home, Robert shared more details of his vision for the Sophia Thompson Scholarship Fund. He had already spoken with contacts at Portland Community College, where I had started my nursing education, to establish the framework. The first scholarships would be awarded the following fall semester. "I was thinking," he said, reviewing notes on his tablet. That recipients should demonstrate not just academic potential, but also some entrepreneurial spirit, following your path, as it were. My path wasn't exactly straightforward, I reminded him. I worked at a coffee shop, took night classes, and volunteered at clinics to get experience. Exactly. Robert nodded emphatically. That's the kind of drive we want to support. Students who aren't afraid to create their own opportunities. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very qualities the Thompsons had once dismissed as common or beneath them were now attributes they wanted to nurture in others. The scholarship would be a concrete manifestation of how profoundly their values had shifted. Meanwhile, Wilson Healthcare continued to thrive. We had expanded to 15 cities, with plans for 5 more the following year. The mobile healthcare model had evolved to include partnerships with school districts, corporate campuses, and senior living communities. Our innovative approach had been featured in medical journals and business publications alike. Cameron was equally successful in his transformation of Thompson Properties. Under his leadership, the company had become a pioneer in sustainable building practices and tenant-centered management. The company that had once been synonymous with profit-focused development was now winning awards for community engagement and environmental responsibility. As Sophia's first birthday approached, Elaine threw herself into planning a celebration. The woman who had once hosted meticulously orchestrated society events now seemed genuinely delighted by children's party decorations and homemade cake recipes. Nothing too extravagant, I cautioned, remembering the Thompson tendency toward excess. Of course not, Elaine agreed easily, though I did rent a small petting zoo. I raised an eyebrow. Just a few baby animals, she clarified with a smile. Sophia loves touch-and-feel books with animals. I thought she'd enjoy meeting some real ones. The consideration behind her reasoning, based on my daughter's actual preferences rather than social expectations, demonstrated how fundamentally Elaine had changed. My mother, initially skeptical about the petting zoo, that child isn't even walking yet, was eventually won over by Elaine's enthusiasm. The two women, once so cautious around each other, now spent hours on the phone discussing party details and debating the merits of various birthday cake recipes. The birthday celebration itself was joyful chaos, a mixture of our friends, colleagues, and family members from both sides. Robert, wearing jeans and a casual button-down that would have been unthinkable in his previous life, helped children pet the lambs and rabbits. Elaine, her designer shoes discarded in favor of practical flats, served homemade ice cream with evident delight. My mother, who had once felt so out of place in the Thompson world, moved comfortably among the guests, proudly showing photos of Sophia to anyone who would look. Watching my daughter delight in petting a lamb while surrounded by people from such different worlds, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't known I was seeking. The artificial boundaries that had once divided our family had dissolved, not through forced tolerance, but through genuine connection and shared love for this small human who belonged to all of us. Later that evening, as we put an exhausted Sophia to bed, Cameron wrapped his arms around me from behind. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Beyond anything I imagined possible?" I replied honestly. He turned me to face him, his expression suddenly serious. "I was thinking about what Dad said at the party, about second chances and clean slates." Robert had offered a toast, his voice thick with emotion as he thanked everyone for being part of our family's second chapter. It had been a surprisingly vulnerable moment from a man once so guarded about appearances. "What about it?" I asked. "Cameron, maybe it's time we consider giving Sophia a sibling," he suggested. "If you're ready, health-wise." The doctor said after a year. The idea of another child, a brother or sister for Sophia, filled me with unexpected joy. My recovery from brain surgery had been complete, with no lingering effects. Wilson Healthcare was running smoothly, with an executive team that could handle operations during a maternity leave, and our family, once so fractured, had found its rhythm. "I'd like that," I said, leaning into his embrace. "Very much." The following Monday, returning to work after the birthday festivities, I found an unexpected visitor waiting in my office. Lawrence Whitmore, the developer who had revealed Robert's scheming at that fateful anniversary party 2 years earlier. "I hope you don't mind the drop-in," he said, rising as I entered. "I've been meaning to connect with you about a potential collaboration." Intrigued, I invited him to explain. Lawrence had acquired several properties in underserved neighborhoods and wanted to partner with Wilson Healthcare to establish permanent community health centers within these developments. "Robert's book got me thinking," he admitted, "about legacy, impact, using resources for meaningful change. Your mobile healthcare model has proven effective. I'd like to help scale it with permanent infrastructure." The proposal was compelling, exactly the kind of expansion I had been considering for Wilson Healthcare. As we discussed possibilities, I realized how profoundly the ripple effects of our family transformation had spread beyond just the Thompsons. I need to review this with my team," I told him, "but preliminarily, I'm very interested." After Lawrence left, I sat quietly at my desk, contemplating the journey of the past 9 years. From being judged as a gold digger to becoming a respected business leader, from fighting for acceptance to finding genuine connection with the very people who had once dismissed me. The most meaningful change wasn't professional success or even the Thompsons' newfound respect. It was the freedom I now felt from external validation. The gold digger accusation had once wounded me deeply because part of me feared it might contain a kernel of truth, that perhaps I hadn't earned my place in this world of privilege and power. Now I understood with complete clarity, my worth had never been dependent on the Thompsons' assessment. My value wasn't increased by their eventual acceptance, just as it hadn't been diminished by their initial rejection. 3 months later, I confirmed what I had begun to suspect. I was pregnant with our second child. When we shared the news with our families, the celebration was immediate and unrestrained. My mother immediately began planning a quilt, Robert started sketching designs for a new cradle, and Elaine produced a list of gender-neutral names she had apparently been compiling, just in case. That weekend, we hosted Sunday dinner at our home, a tradition that had evolved from awkward obligation to genuine pleasure. As I watched Robert help Cameron grill while my mother and Elaine played with Sophia on a blanket in the yard, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find Catherine Chen, my COO and closest friend at Wilson Healthcare, who had joined us for the gathering. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is the same family you used to complain about," she remarked, observing the domestic scene. "The way you described them when we first met." "People can change," I replied. "Sometimes they just need the right catalyst." "Paying off their mortgage was quite the catalyst," Catherine said with a wry smile. "Most people would have walked away after that public humiliation." I considered this. It wasn't about the money, really. It was about breaking a cycle, showing them that their worst assumptions about me were wrong, but not in the way they expected. Later, as we all gathered around the dinner table, Robert raised his glass in an impromptu toast. "To my family," he said simply. "Not the one we're born into or marry into, but the one we choose to build together, day by day." As glasses clinked and smiles were exchanged across the table, I caught Cameron's eye. The journey that had begun with a chance meeting at a grocery store had taken us through challenges neither of us could have anticipated. We had weathered judgment, illness, financial crisis, and profound family conflict. Yet here we were, not just surviving, but thriving, surrounded by people who had moved beyond their preconceptions to see each other clearly, perhaps for the first time. "And to second chances," I added, raising my water glass, a silent signal of my pregnancy that only Cameron understood for now. and to the wisdom to recognize them when they come. The gold digger accusation hurled at an anniversary party had become, ironically, the gift that forced genuine transformation. It had stripped away pretense and pride, creating space for something authentic to grow in its place. The Thompsons had lost their fortune, but found something of greater value: the ability to connect beyond the boundaries of class, background, and expectation. As for me, I had discovered that true wealth had nothing to do with bank accounts or family names. It existed in the courage to remain true to oneself, the wisdom to offer forgiveness when it wasn't expected, and the strength to build bridges where others might have burned them. Looking around at this improbable family we had created, expecting to grow yet again with our second child, I realized we had all, in our own ways, struck gold. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.